You're listening to Quorum Radio.
Those photographs,
recreations? What do you think?
I, I think that's the Fox photographs. There's a lot of things wrong with those photographs, and you know, they there's a photograph in there with they call the death stare. Well, that wasn't the case. When the head was unwrapped, the left eye was closed, the right eye was slightly open. I mean, it just a fraction of the lid was up, and that we never saw that photograph. I've talked to people a lot of times about that. The other thing that they have is they have some photographs of the head with the hair and scalp hanging, and if you look closely to it, you'll see that that triangular wound there. If you could look close to it, you'll see there's some scalp that's laid over to the left. If you're looking from behind the body or behind the skull, and then but the most striking thing of that is if you see the brain tissue there, the brain tissue is normal. It's not, it doesn't look like as a matter of fact, that looks like the brain tissue is absolutely normal. You can see the convolutions of the brain and that type of thing. And when you traumatize brain has a large amount of liquid in it, and it kind of gels. So that one's not good. There are other photographs there that have a metal headrest holding the head up.
Right.
I did autopsies in that lab for 14 months, and we never used it. And none of the other students who did autopsies either ever used it. We didn't even know it existed. And so I really don't even know if the table would accept something like that. And then,
Amazing.
there are other anomalies there. The phone on the wall, wasn't there. It was over by the deep sink, partially into the little hallway, and it was memorable because it had a curly-Q cord on it that would reach all over the morgue, and we were always getting tripped up by that cord.
Right. So you didn't see that. You didn't see that.
No. And then there's also another one where it shows something that's sitting against the wall that looks like it may be a box. I guess it possibly could be an X-ray machine, but it's not clear that you can see that. So I'm not sure that all those photographs were taken in the morgue. I couldn't vouch for that.
Okay. All right. So basically, it's too bad we can't, because of the computer problems, we couldn't get you with a video stream. But so the wound in the back of the head, there was a wound in the back of the head, right?
Yes, in the parietal occipital area.
Right, which is kind of the parietal occipital. Occipital is the back of the head, the bottom, the base of the skull, right?
Yeah, it's not totally at the base of the skull, but it was. The parietal is if you divide go to the center of the skull, parietal bones are on the right and left side of that skull, and in the back there's kind of a U-shaped bone there that's the occipital. And my tongue's tied.
Occipital?
Occipital.
All right. Okay. Great. So then basically, and because it's kind of like it extends around one area to another, I think. But basically in the back of the head, the wound in the back of the head was about the size of your fist, depending upon how big the fist is, of course.
Well, like I said, it's according to how you look at your fist.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it wasn't a huge round wound like that.
Right.
That you could put your fist into or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
It was more of an area, like I said, about roughly 4 long and 2.5, 3 foot. 4 inches long and 2.5 inches wide.
Right. Sure. Okay.
And that was the wound. That was where the bone and scalp were missing.
Right. Right. So okay. So now you've seen the Zapruder film, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I
Was
I
it,
did. I have a copy of both of them.
okay. What you saw in the Zapruder film, is that consistent with the head trauma that you saw at Bethesda Naval Hospital and the morgue room for the autopsy?
Yeah, the trauma, basically, the trauma to the head was extensive because the whole right side of the head was fractured, and and the bone was being held together by the scalp.
Wow.
As I said, you could take your hand and move the right side of the head around. As a matter of fact, when Dr. Humes took the brain out, all he did was make a coronal suture, which is from the top of the head downward toward the neck. He described it as being from the top of the head down to the middle of the ear.
Right.
That was forward of it almost, and that's kind of where the flap was, and the flap that you described would have kind of obliterated that incision he made.
Right.
And then
Sure.
the way the brain was removed, it already had the incision and the fractures at the top of it they ran from the back of the head forward. So all they did was lay that part of the skull over and remove the brain.
Right. Sure. So then the description that I heard, I think William Matson Law gave me, who has done a lot of work with you and Hugh Clark, was that the JFK's head was like a sort of like a hard-boiled egg that had fallen on the floor, where it was
Well,
being
yes,
held,
it was. Yeah,
sort of like it was being held together by the membrane, the
right.
egg. But I mean, of course, that was the scalp,
Yeah,
sort of, and so it was just basically, I mean, one tremendous wound, sort of. I mean, just like tremendous fracturing. Could you see that there was a lot of like blood loss through, let's say, like compound fractures in the cranium? Would you say, is that possible? Or
well,
that,
I know that the brain, there was tissue missing from the brain. The brain had some anomalies too that I noticed at the time, but I didn't really have that much medical experience and knowledge at that point in time, but I did notice that the brain that Dr. Humes removed from the cranium, when he removed it, he gave it to Dr. Boswell, and Dr. Boswell motioned for me, and we went over, and I knelt down on the floor, which is where the brain bucket was, and Dr. Boswell gave me the brain. I turned it upside down, put it in the sling over the bucket to put the infusion needles in, and there was a lot of things. I noticed that when the brain was given to Dr. Boswell, that the convolutions of the brain were smooth, and they were kind of a pale color, and they seemed to be wider than normally the brains that we took at autopsy. And then it also, the damage to the brain, the missing tissue in the brain didn't seem to fit very well with the damage in the back of the head. Seems like it would have been more extensive. And I might also say that when they supposedly the official weight on that brain was 1,500 grams. That's 200 grams more than a normal brain, or the average normal brain. So,
Sure.
but we then when I took the brain, I turned it upside down, and what we normally did at Bethesda, we infused the brain. We had needles that came down from a carboy of formalin, and we insert those into the severed internal carotids at the basal arteries at the bottom of the brain, and let it infuse during the rest of the autopsy. Then we would take it out and drop it into that bucket of formalin, put a lid on it, and they would let it sit for usually till Monday, the following Monday, when they did brain conference or supplemental autopsies, as they called them.
And by the way, did that happen, Jim? Was the brain kept in that bucket with the formalin for a Monday conference to examine?
Well, there's evidence that there were actually two brain conferences. There's evidence that there was one Tuesday, I guess, afterwards. And because there was one where Dr. Boswell and Dr. Humes attended, and then Stringer, who was the photographer, civilian photographer, he attended that one. And then there was one later where Dr. Fink attended. And then there was a photographer attended that one with Dr. Boswell, Dr. Humes, and Dr. Fink, but that photographer was never named. And I know when Mr. Stringer did his deposition, for the House Select Committee, he said that he actually, that they did coronal sections of the brain, which means they actually slice the brain in sections from front to back, and that he took those sections, put them on a viewing plate, and took photographs of them. But Dr. Humes later testified that what he did was they didn't do those sections for the brain out of respect for the family wanting to add the brain to the casket. All of that is, all of that's kind of a missing. That's not really something. I mean, you can tell that. I mean, those two autopsies were done, but you can't really get any definitive evidence of that. And the statements that are made about the brain they really don't make sense. Supposedly, Dr. Humes said that he gave the brain to Admiral Berkeley, who was the physician, the president's physician, to be buried with the president's body. But that first supplemental autopsy, which was the brain, didn't occur until after the burial on Monday.
Sure.
And then the other one was later on. And then some of the other things that don't make sense is that Dr. Humes says that he put the brain in Captain Stover's locked it in his closet, but he doesn't say when he did that. And then,
Wow.
The first autopsy was done, about 72 hours. So that would have had to have been the one that was infused, because if it had just been dropped in the bucket, you wouldn't have been able to do that supplemental autopsy for about 6 days. And there's a lot of questions about that part of the supplemental. So, but again, too, is I really can't attest to that. I can just look at at what the brain would have been like, if it was infused, and what it wouldn't be. I do know that the brain that we took at autopsy did not correlate with the official autopsy description of the trauma to the brain.
Right. Okay, Jim, let me ask you a question. Do you think I want to ask you also about what appeared to be a bullet pathway in the front of the president's head, but before we do that, I want to get your impression on something. Did you have a sense that things were being rushed and weren't being carefully examined, and the things just weren't done with thoroughness?
Oh, I think, the examinations were thorough, and I know that the body autopsy that I did helped with Dr. Boswell, assisted Dr. Boswell, and was a normal, thorough autopsy of the body cavity, of the body proper. The only thing we didn't do was we didn't take the spinal cord, which we normally would have done, but probably there wasn't any reason to do that. Sure. I know there was a big reluctance on the family to allow us to do a complete body autopsy. But since we weren't able to find any major fragments, Dr. Fink was concerned about, the bullets being somewhere in the body. So.
Right. And so, in other words, I guess at the conclusion of that autopsy on the president's body, Dr. Pierre Fink felt that they hadn't really made a complete assessment and determination if there were additional fragments in the body.
Well, no, what happened was that during the x-rays were repeated 3 times. And the last time Dr. Eversole, who was a radiologist, directed them, and they never found any major metal fragments in the body itself, or in the head itself, and that was a big point of contention with the 4 officers that were in the gallery, and between them and the pathologist.
Was there back and forth?
That was what. Pardon?
Was there some back and forth they were commenting, or did you get any of that?
Well,
hear any of that?
I couldn't hear any of the conversation between Dr. Humes and the individual that kept calling him back over to the gallery to talk with him. And
Right. All right. Let me ask you a question before we get to the back wound. So tell us about what the physician saw in the front of JFK's head. That supposedly there might have been something that could have looked like a bullet path, that a bullet had entered his head. Tell us about that. Or was it like conjecture? They weren't quite sure, or what was it?
I have no idea. There's a photograph. It looks like there's a V in the right forehead. But I think my personal feeling, I didn't see that, and I think that may have been part of the incision, that was used to take the brain out.
Okay.
The face,
Sure.
the face was not. There was a slight bruise in the right temple close to the eye, but the face looked normal. I mean, there
You
was
almost couldn't
no
tell.
damage to the face, and that I saw. Well,
Right.
there's none there. So,
Sure. So, Jim, I want to ask you about I'm just curious. I mean, I assume that when the body was brought into Bethesda, it had not been washed.
no, it wasn't. I mean, the head was still had matted blood and hair and so forth, and the wrappings of the head. Actually, what was happening when Dr. Jenkins was unwrapping the head was wrapped in two layers, pretty much. It had a sheet wrapped around it, and then there was something that I thought might have been a towel that was wrapped under that. And then when you started taking that off, it had adhered to the head and so forth by because of the dried blood and serum and so forth. And at that time, the wound gaped open, but it was basically along that incision that I described earlier. But
Right.
it,
Okay.
it went back to where it normally was. Where, well,
All right. So, in other words, I mean, the question I want to ask you is that was there gray matter all over the president's head and mixed in with blood and serum and all over his hair, or where was it concentrated?
it was concentrated in the back of his head,
Right. That's where you
pretty much
saw. Yeah.
pretty much from uh, behind the ear to the back of his head. Now there was blood. His hair, he had a lot of hair, and the hair had become saturated with blood. And over a period of time, the blood had clotted, and the serum had formed, and it had matted the hair and stuck it together, and so forth.
Right. Did you have, by the way, did you see, was there any kind of a dried pool of blood that accumulated within the sheets or the towels such that you saw like it
Well,
just had pooled?
well, the head wound, the wrap, the wrap that was directly uh, intact with the head was blood soaked.
Yeah. Right. So then, okay. Right. So and it just must have been a hellacious mess with just blood all over the place.
Well, it
And
was, and that, I mean, if you had looked at that, and that would have always seen, you would have thought, well, oh, the back of his head's gone, but that was not
yeah.
the case.
Right. So the back of his head was not gone.
No, no.
Okay.